think that's all I'll say, and then I'll introduce my amazing friend, storyteller, amazing roots musician, teacher, father, man of the cloth, the Reverend Robert Jones.
Whoa, that's a whole lot. So you got, yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me and everything. I'm down here in the Blues Cave, which is somehow a replication of one of my favorite spaces, the Cracker Barrel. So you see the old phone behind me. Traveling musicians tend to like Cracker Barrels because they're familiar. We know exactly where the bathroom is. But you guys, it's so great to see so many of you in this room and this virtual room. And I see some friends of mine from various places. Also, I always want to acknowledge Annie Caps for the great work that she does with Farm. And yeah, absolutely. And, I remember that I was asked and honored to deliver the keynote at Farm, I think a couple years ago. And, we talked about the idea of honoring our fathers and our mothers in the music. And one of the things that came out of that was the idea that, we look around and we see that our music is important and is powerful. And there's is really no better forum for um, some of the issues that we get into than roots music, the music that our mothers and fathers and musical great grandparents produced. But a lot of times I don't think we use it effectively to communicate some of those things that we have on our minds. And then, of course, we roll into this crazy and horrendous week that we've had with the situation with George Floyd, and immediately it all comes rushing back to us that we are in a sense victims of privilege. We're all victims of this thing that's been created, and so how do we get out of it, and how do we use our music to combat some of those issues that we see represented in the news and obviously with police and with on social media as we go after each other. So it's really wonderful to have this forum and this opportunity to talk about some of those things for just a little while. And like Matt said, not necessarily to give all the answers, but to maybe to question the answers that we already have.
Well, that being said, Robert, could you talk a little bit just about what's been going through your mind with all the different hats you wear? I know your preacher hat may be a little different than your artist hat or your teacher hat, but I mean, obviously, anybody who's been paying attention to history in the last century shouldn't be shocked by what's been going on lately in the news. But there seems to be a kind of elevation right now of it just something seems different right now, and I don't know
Yeah.
if it's because we're in the thick of it or how it's going to end up once the smoke clears. But what's going on in your mind right now?
I think we are certainly in the thick of it, which is one of those things that brings it to the top. But we, if we're students of history, we have to realize that there were times when our ancestors were in the thick of it too. There were times when, imagine coming out of slavery with absolutely no skills other than whatever it was that you did on a plantation, and absolutely no education, nobody to help you, no schools. You didn't even know how to buy your own clothes, your own shoes. But somehow folks got together, African Americans, whites, Native Americans, other people got together and started to create some of the institutions that we take for granted that help those folks get over those hurdles. We go into the Great Depression when everybody's looking around and nobody can find work, and people are traveling from rural places to urban places and running into prejudice and running into racism and running into sexism and running into nationalism. And that was a point where the music helped us to what transcend and transform the times that they were living in then. Think about Vietnam and all of the other situations that have come on. The civil rights movement is a classic case. We look at folks like Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Odetta, and Harry Belafonte, and all of those folks who took music and kind of helped to bypass people's brains and go straight to their hearts and to create change. I think the thing that's happened is that we have, as a community of folk singers, if you will, we have sort of pulled back from our social responsibility, and we sing songs about, falling in love and falling out of love and all of that good stuff, which is good. I mean, absolutely wonderful. But, this folk music was about survival, and it was about higher truths, and it was about confronting things that were really hard to confront through anything other than art. And so now we're called upon to find ways to communicate those things, and to use our craft for the greater good. And since we haven't been using our craft, I can't say entirely, but largely in that way, it seems strange and we seem off balance that we don't have a bunch of folks who are singing those songs. We look around for the Pete Seegers and the Phil Oaks and the Bob Dylans and the Richie Havens and the Odettas to deal with the issues that we're dealing with now in 2020.
So what would you say would be the role of an artist in all of this right now? What do you think? What do you think we can uniquely bring to this picture? I mean, some, like you said, some of us have been writing songs about, personal things and but which are important, as you said, but there's lots of different ways to approach this artistically, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've talked about this a million times, but
Mhm.
the idea of lecturing someone is one thing, but when we use art, it seems to change not just the mind, but it gets to the mind through the heart, and I think that's really kind of what I would consider a sustainable mind change, you know?
Right. I mean, I think about that artist, and you probably can pull her name up more easily than I. But there was an artist recently who did a song called "And the President Sang Amazing Grace."
Yep, that was.
Boom.
You remember
So
Annie? I blanking on her name. Zoe.
I'm blanking on her name. So yeah. So immediately you had that sort of,
Mulford, Zoe Mulford.
Yep, Zoe
there
Mulford.
you go. You had that immediate thing of paying tribute to President Obama in his graciousness and in in his Obama-ness, that immediately, whether you were, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, what that said was that I respected the fact that my president was singing and was singing Amazing Grace in a difficult time. That kind of songwriting is rare. I mean, it's around, but it's rare. But we, in a sense of trying to be the newest and the freshest thing, those of us in our generation, especially who have a few gray hairs, or a lot of gray hairs, we have a form and we have an ability to sing and to write with conviction about the things that are important to us. I know every performer, every African American performer that I know of who deals with some controversial issues will have has had this experience. You know, I can sing a song about the Great Flood of 1927 that hit Mississippi, and everybody goes, "Yeah, I love that, Charlie Patton. Yeah, high water everywhere." But if I sang a song about George Floyd, then it'd be like, I didn't come here for that. I came here to be entertained. So what you're saying is, I want you to sing about something that happened 90 years ago that didn't affect you directly, but don't sing about something that happened last week that does affect you directly. And when you put together songs, there are so many issues, so many images. The image of the police officers who took a knee in the middle of a protest. Whoa, what a big concept. The image of the policeman who took off his riot gear and walked with the protesters because he didn't want to be associated with the idea of a police state, but he wanted to say, if I see peaceful protests, I'm going to be a part of it. The image, likewise, of a president holding a Bible in front of a church while ordering folks to tear gas peaceful protesters. That's heavy duty, you know, songwriting subject matter. And we are the songwriters and we're the performers, and you know, wherever we can, I think, slip some of that stuff in that cause people to question our answers. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yes, and I think also, would you say that we have to be a little careful too, because those songs seem like low-hanging fruit, but they often take more craft than the love song, you know, and they really,
Oh yeah.
in order to convey, you know, it's real easy to take a hammer to it, but those are not generally the songs that last very long. I think in terms of songs like Keep Your Eyes on the Prize, which, like so many other of those early protest songs, were just redone spirituals.
Hmm.
But I like to point out that when you listen to Keep Your Eyes on the Prize until the very end of that song, none of those couplets tell you what the prize
The
is.
prizes.
And that's why 50 years later, it can be whatever it is for you. That's what makes those songs universal.
Right. I love the idea. Joel Mabus told me. He said sometimes when he sings that song, "Touch a Name on the Wall," which the wall, of course, is the Vietnam, memorial in Washington. He says when I sing that song, "Touch a Name on the Wall," I will have veterans come up and say, "Man, what a great veteran song," and I'll have somebody else say, "What a great anti-war song." And you know, people hear it as they hear it because a good song is like a good parable. It's open to interpretation, and and you get in where you fit in.
Right.
I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but then if it was easy, anybody could do it. We're not talking about the stuff that came out after 9/11, which was like, let's put a boot in their butt. But the things that came out and made us think about, what we had been through and what we're going through right now, I think those things have a lasting impression. And like touching on one more thing, it's amazing that America has this really short attention span, and we get really worked up about something, and then immediately it goes away. So right now, everybody is talking about Black Thursday, and let's not have music. Let's show solidarity to the African American community, and whatever, whatever, whatever. Before then, it was like COVID. It was like, let's show unity in the midst of the COVID, and let's show how we are dealing with the COVID. Let's do online benefits to help benefit people who are dealing with and have been hurt by the COVID. Before that, it was Me Too. And all of the stars were talking about Me Too, whether we supported it or whether we didn't, and that kind of thing. And before that, it may have been homelessness. And before that, it's almost like these are issues that we move through without any substantive solutions until the next crisis or the next issue pops up.
Right.
But I would submit that the only way you're really going to fight institutional racism is to change people's hearts, which will cause them to change their minds, which will cause them to look at any given situation sort of with a new eye and say, this isn't right.
So,
You know,
wow. So, all of a sudden, we as artists do have a role in all of this because that is our goal, after all. Um, so, as a preacher, can I get your opinion about this? Next week, will they be sending locusts? What's the next? No.
I like
Um,
I like I like the little old lady who's 102 years old, and some of you are not in Michigan, but in Michigan, there was a dam that broke around Midland, Michigan, and this 102-year-old lady, they take her out of the nursing home so that she'll be safe, and they put her up in a gym, and they stick a microphone up under her nose, and she says, this is amazing. First, there was the COVID, then there's the flood, and now I'm just waiting for the locust. So, question. So that is a question.
I
What will
guess
the
it is.
next wave be as we go through this time? Is this the apocalypse? Is this the end? Who knows? But while we're dealing with whatever it is that we're dealing with, you still have to deal with it as best you can.
Well, let me see if I can focus this into really the kind of day-to-day work that we're all involved in, and kind of use some of my experience as someone who's been making a, can you see the quotes, living doing this for the last 25 years or so. Um,
As
and
opposed
so,
to a killing.
exactly. Um, and that is a couple of things. These are some of the observations I've made over the years, sitting in panels in Folk Alliance since almost the beginning. Just in the 25 or 30 years or so that I've been doing this, almost every single Folk Alliance conference I've ever been in has at least had a panel about or has brought up this idea of how and why can't we attract more people of color, more minorities to this music, especially given, what this music, where this music comes from, and all that. And you've had some really good ideas on that that I've heard before. I'm hoping you're channeling them right now. But what have you thought about that idea? Because that comes up every single year. How can we be more inclusive?
Right. Um, One of the things that I think we can do is I had an amazing cab ride was I was flying into Nova Scotia for the Lunenburg Folk Festival, and I had a cab, shared a cab, or shared a driver with Dar Williams, and Dar was talking about the idea that there are some folks who are bridgers, and I said, "What's a bridger?" She said, "There are people who bridge two communities or several communities. They have their foot firmly in one, and then they have their foot in another one." And sometimes those communities don't talk to each other, but the bridger is the only person who can sort of put one community in touch with the other community. And I think about so many of us are bridgers or have the potential to be bridgers, that one of the reasons that you don't have a large African American population in folk music, and I often joke that if I show up at a folk festival, and Guy Davis shows up at the same festival, or Reggie Harris shows up at the same festival, I joke, "Oh crap! Now I need to buy a name tag because usually I am the black guy, right?" So how do we combat that? Well, one of the things I think we do is we understand that this music is built on relationships. And those relationships happen pretty naturally. Those are the people that we meet and we interact with, and they are our friends. But most folks don't leave the community that they are a part of for whatever reason, comfort, or don't feel welcome, or don't have a reason. So the people who are bridgers have to connect those communities in some real substantive ways. One of the reasons that you don't have a lot of African American folk musicians is because folk music has often not reached out to African American musicians. If you consider yourself to be a songwriter, or heaven help you, a spoken word artist, your experience is to buy a track. Your experience is to pick up an electric guitar, or to be in front of a band, or to have a crew, because that's the way that music is experienced. Most of us don't understand, or I would say most African American, young African American musicians don't even know that there's a world where people sit down and listen to your music without the drum track, without the heavy percussion, without the lights and the laser light show. They're not aware that that world exists. On the other side, you have folk clubs that I'm sure would, you know, be perfectly willing to book an act, but they don't know what to do with their sound. Here's this person, but they don't show up with a Martin guitar. They show up with a synthesizer, or they show up with a drum, or they show up with a beatbox, or they show up with a track, and you don't exactly know what to do with that, right? So, in not knowing what to do with it, you don't make accommodations for their kind of folk music, which is really still folk music, but it's rooted in the 21st century, not in the 20th, right? Or not even in the 19th. If you want those people, you have to make room for them at the table. And you have to say to them, there's a group of people who would love to hear what you say, but they may not be ready for the way you say it. So you might have to moderate, not necessarily your message, but you might have to moderate how you're used to delivering it. On the other hand, there's this group of people who have something to say that you we think is really important, and you might have to change the way you think about music in order to receive it. And if you can be one of those bridgers who's talking to both communities, then all of a sudden you see that there are folks who are interested in a wider variety of artists and a wider understanding of the music.
I've actually talked to venue operators who, everything always good intentions, saying things like, I just don't get it. I brought in Sparky and Rhonda Rucker, and black people didn't come.
Right, right.
Why? You
And
know,
Sparky and Rhonda's a perfect example. Sparky is a man whose really his message is to be one of those bridges from the black community to the white community. He talks about things like the Underground Railroad and African American history and tradition, and he brings these old styles with him. And so he is an effective bridge from that community to the white community or to the white folk community. But what you lack is the bridge going from that white community into that black community. So
could
for
you?
me,
Oh,
for
I was going to
example,
ask you to tell that. Oh, go finish that, and I'll ask you the
yeah,
question.
for me, for example, the fact that when I showed up at an open mic at the Arc 20 years ago, that David Siglin said, I like what you did, and really created opportunities for me to A, open for people, and B, eventually have my own set. And so at that farm where we honored the Davids, listened to the wisdom of the Davids, one of the things that I was able to say to him is, I don't think I would be where I am if you had not opened the door and made me welcome and let me know that this thing called folk music existed. I would have made music in church, and I may have made music in a club, but I would not be making music on the folk circuit.
If you don't mind, and we are going to get to your questions in a moment. I'm Annie. I turned my cell phone off, so I don't know what time it is. So just feel free to let us know when we need to switch over. Robert and I, before this whole COVID thing hit last year, played a really wonderful afternoon concert at a temple near Detroit, and as almost always happens when we do this kind of work, they'll come and say, we really should, here, bridge building, we really should have a cultural exchange. I would love to have the temple go see you preach and get to know your church, and then you could come and see our temple. And again, you leave and you go, what a perfect, that sounds perfect. But then you think about it on the ride home and you start talking to Robert Jones, and that changes a bit.
Right. So, what are the logistics of this exchange? I know what you want. You want the experience of the black church. You want folks who worship, with enthusiasm and spirit and a sense of abandon. And you want that spirit that is part of the African American music and church experience. But what do we get? Yeah, maybe we get some money, and that money's good. But do you really get the idea that when somebody opens up an apprenticeship or a scholarship or a business, and they're looking for a young person that they could train to that new profession or looking for somebody to hire, do they think, oh my God, well, we don't know anybody, we don't have anybody here who can take advantage of this program, but there are young people we just encountered at that Baptist church who could really use this mentoring and these connections and when you have this idea of like a cultural exchange, it should be a cultural exchange. And then think about what you've just done in that black church. You have just taken the place where you might feel safe about expressing what you really feel in the community that you're dealing with, and you've just opened it up and said, okay, well, now everybody come and see what we really think. But on the other hand, you have not opened up opportunities and you have not opened up access to folks who could help to bring about that change. You haven't created a real conversation. What you did is you sent a delegation and then they came back.
Because we're really talking about, for instance, in this case, a place of worship that has 800 families in their congregation wanting to do an exchange with a congregation like yours, which has what, 50 families?
Like maybe, yeah, even less. Maybe,
Right.
on a good day when we were not doing church online, we might have what, 50 or 60 people in the church. And now with technology, actually, our church is expanded. When we get back in it, we might have to build another one because we're actually talking to people who we're talking to more people than our church will hold. But I'm not naive enough to think that all those folks are going to come to church. But nevertheless, you get the idea. You're looking at somebody who's got 900 families in that synagogue, and we don't have 900 members in our church. So again, if you're going to do an exchange, you have to take those kind of things into account.
And of course, that doesn't just apply to synagogues. That's true of all, other churches. Just almost every time Robert and I do a church, that idea of cultural exchange seems to come up, which again, it is so well intentioned. And I don't mean to say that it isn't, because I know these folks and they're wonderful, wonderful folks. Speaking of which, and maybe unless there's something else you want to end with, Robert, let's talk about some boots on the ground stuff here. I mean, we've traveled around, you've traveled around for the last 30 years playing the folk circuit. And we have noted several times this idea of good intentioned people showing racist qualities, little hidden things that we encounter all the time. And I got to say, my hanging out with you has opened my eyes to this in a way that I don't think I could have got it any other way. I don't think I could have learned this any other way, given the place of privilege I come from. But we've noticed, just the little things, right?
Right. So we were playing on a place in Ohio, for example, and you remember this because this is one of the few times I actually got angry. Uh,
Yes, I
it's,
remember.
it's before it's before the show, and a gentleman comes in to tell us
He was like
how the
this. He was
show.
like the house manager, right? An old
House
guy. Yeah.
manager, right? Older white gentleman. He's going to tell us how the show goes. But we're in a room. I'm here, you're there, and he talks to you exclusively. He doesn't even acknowledge that I'm in the room. And then we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this. And then he turns around and leaves. And I'm like, did you see that? And it was obvious that it was two white men talking about how things are supposed to go, and the black guy was just supposed to go along with the plan and the program. What that is racist, but is also maybe more importantly about privilege. And we see the language of privilege slide into all of these unfair or inequitable exchanges. Me Too is about privilege. It's about a guy who thinks I'm the guy and I can take advantage of the situation and the power that I have to get what I want. That's privilege, right? And if I try this out on 10 women and it works on 6 of them, then the other 4, they must be lesbians or crazy or whatever, because I have this privilege. The idea that you have folks who say, I will give you the right to speak your mind just like I can speak my mind is privilege because, dude, you can't give me anything. It's mine. I'm human. I'm grown just like you. So when you speak in terms of giving, opening, welcoming, in a sense, it's a great thing, but in a sense, it also comes from this idea of what privilege. I've got it, and I'm willing to let you in. And I shared with Annie a little earlier today. It's not a black white thing, it's a human thing. I have a sister in law who happens to be black, but also happens to be Mormon because she married a gentleman who was Mormon. That marriage broke up. She now has 4 interracial children, all of who are trying to figure out where they stand in this time, trying to figure out whether they're black, whether they're white, whether they're Mormon, whether they're Christian, whether they want a religion at all. And one of my sisters in law posted an opinion by a young African American young lady who looked like she may have been of mixed ancestry, talking about, I don't support George Floyd. Well, my sister-in-law posted that saying, that's how I feel too. And it drew a crap load of of negative comments from my own extended family of folks saying, you don't get it. It doesn't matter if the man was a criminal. It doesn't matter if he was a, my son said, it doesn't matter if he was a serial killer. The fact of the matter is an African American who does not make it to trial, to jail, to sentencing, to arraignment because a cop decides to take his life, there's something wrong with that system. But I'm saying this simply to say that this is not just a black white thing, this is a human thing because we all deal with that idea of who has the privilege and who is going to open up that privilege to let whoever it is in.
Do you remember when we were playing down in North Carolina and the big celebration was that they brought the flag down over the in South Carolina, they finally brought the Confederate flag down, and we were at the Swannanoa gathering and we were celebrating and feeling good about ourselves, and then you and I hit the road to come back to Michigan, and we drive under the underpass in Tennessee where there's, probably 100 white folks
Confederate flags and
hanging
white folks
Confederate
swinging
flags and
and
daring people.
waving and right.
I'm still
But
surprised you didn't get out with me. I was going to confront those dudes, but
yeah, right. And use all of your kung fu abilities, right?
yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's even the little things. It's like, well, we've all played these wonderful church basement type concerts, and 4 out of 5 times at the end of the night, they'll be wrapping up the food and they'll make a plate and they'll present it to Robert. Can you
Right.
imagine?
It's if I'm like training for sumo. It's if to say, from my place of privilege, my understanding is that you as a black man need our orts more than the white guy needs our orts.
And again, the intention is good, so
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
but it's just, I think sometimes good to sort of remind us of these things. Do you mind if I go through a couple of the questions in the
Not
chat?
at
And then
all.
Annie, if
Please.
people want to raise their hands, we can,
Yeah.
it says, Robert talked about having a foot in both communities, white and black. Where are the connection, where the connections are you seeing the questions? I'm not sure I understand that question.
I'm not sure I do
That
either.
was because that was me typing poorly.
Oh, okay.
Oh, my
Do you know what
mistake.
the
So
question was,
yeah,
Annie?
well, I think no, Robert, yesterday when we were talking, that was one of the things that I think kind of kicked off the conversation, just about the idea that, you're yourself as an example of somebody who has your foot in both communities, and how that was where we started talking about the bridges,
Mhm.
and so yeah.
And
How?
let
Oh,
me
go
say,
ahead.
you don't have to be black to have
Right.
connections in that community. You don't have to be anything other than a person who is respected and connected in a given community in order to have that relationship. We all knew Father William Cunningham from Focus Hope, who was blonde, blue-eyed motorcycle riding priest who came into Detroit at the end of the riots in '67. But Father Cunningham was a dangerous guy to be around because he would look you in the eye and tell you he wanted you to buy a bag of groceries for this woman who lived on the west side because she didn't have enough to eat and a way to feed her children. You just take your eyes off of me, please, because he just had that ability. Those connections, in other words, don't have to be racial. They are what social. But when we talk about that idea of a connection, if you wanted to encourage one of those young African American spoken word artists to come to your club, since they've never been to the Arc or Cafe Lena or any of those other great clubs, they probably don't even have an idea that they exist, or if they exist, they have preconceived notions about them. So, to the degree that you could sponsor, if somebody has to open for you, right? Maybe you get that opening act that is unconventional, who probably would not normally be playing that club, but they come with you as a package deal, and people get to know them, and they get to know you, as they already know you. So that's one way you do that. Then that person goes back to that community and say, "Hey man, do you know there's a place in Ann Arbor, man? They not drinking, they ain't toking, they ain't man, they just sit there and listen to your music, man. And they pay you, dude." All of a sudden, that message is going out almost a la Facebook from one person to another, and you've got this network of people who now see a viable folk market where is before they didn't even know folk music existed.
My guess is there's probably something a little generational going on as well. It's like,
Oh yeah.
yeah. So that's the other question, of course, at every Folk Alliance meeting is how do we get younger people in? And I think I've come to the conclusion that the problem is younger people don't like partying with their grandpa, is basically what it boils down to.
That's
Um,
that's an absolute viable
yeah,
and an
I
absolute
didn't.
truth.
Yeah, right.
Nobody did. I mean, if we I've heard people say, why don't young African Americans like the music of Muddy Waters? It's like, dude, Muddy Waters was 70 years ago. Do your kids like the music of Lawrence Welk? And the
Right.
one and the two? No. What you have to do is understand that the roots of this music continue on, and there are kids or there are younger people who are interested in the music, but they're interested in it in terms of how they consume it. So if you're trying to put together a camp, all right, and you go, okay, we want to hire an African American person as a teacher or a leader, and we say, okay, Charles Williams, he isn't available, and Josh White Jr., he isn't available, Taj Mahal, he's in Hawaii, he isn't available, Sweet Honey and the Rock, they broke up, they're not available. We don't know anybody, right? Then there's a second tier of folks who are like my age, little older, little younger. Reggie Harris, Harmonica Phil Wiggins, Guy Davis, Gay Abadiglola, Vance Gilbert, Alvin Young Bloodhart, Kim Harris, Ruthie Foster, Diamond Jim Green, Fruitland Jackson, Valerie and Ben Turner, just to name a few. Then another generation after them, Dom Flemings, Quan Willis, Jerron Blind Boy
Paxton.
Paxton, Ron Giddings, Samuel James, John Tavius Willis, Cedric Watson,
Let
Hubby
me
James.
let me just add to that list a new guy, Jake Blount. If you haven't heard Jake Blount, he's
Right.
awesome. Yeah.
And then there are cats below, after them that none of us know about. So if we start to say, if the upper tier are leaving us unfortunately or not available, then go to the second tier. And the second tier will connect you to the third tier. And the third tier will connect you to the fourth tier. And you'll start to realize that there are all of these people who still pick up a guitar or a fiddle or ukulele or a banjo, and they're still making this music in the folk context, and it's still real.
Well, you just answered the question that came up next, which is, how do venues and festivals do better about bringing people of color into their audience and communities? And I think, that's I think that's a solvable thing within those communities. You can figure that out. I don't think you need Robert or Vance Gilbert to tell you how to do that. Chances are, do what Robert just said. Go to those tiers and keep working down. Make those people familiar. It takes work because it's not out there. We often talked about it would be great to have some kind of a clearinghouse website, just so you could say, these are all the performers of color who would come to your festival. Now you can't say you didn't know where to find them. They're all right here on people of color who play festivals.org. There you, there you go. Because that's not a viable excuse to me. It's like, do the research, see who's out there. That may be the booking that's going to be a little harder, but worth the time to take.
Without a doubt. One of the great stories of this music is the story of Willie Nelson and my man, his name just popped out of my brain, but the Charlie Pride, Willie Nelson and Charlie Pride. Charlie Pride has his music and it's being released all over country western stations, and everybody is really anxious to see Charlie Pride at this gig. Now this happened, what, 40, 50 years ago, but he walks out on the stage and nobody knew he was black, and everybody's like, oh my God, what do we do now? And Willie Nelson walks out and kisses him. and that's it. It's
Gives
like,
him the old
oh,
Archie Bunker, huh?
gives
That's
him the
good.
old Archie Bunker. Mwah. And then all of a sudden, Charlie Pride is one of the boys, right? So that you got that idea of there is this idea of welcoming. There's this idea that I would not, at a certain point, I met Mike Seeger. And if not for Mike Seeger, in a sense, welcomed me into the idea of doing some of the kinds of music that I'm interested in and the work that I'm interested in right now. And, you know, it was at that point of seeing Mike Seeger that I decided I would rather be the black Mike Seeger than the short Taj Mahal. And and so when I approached Mike, it was like, yeah, carry it on, right? Here's a guy who's interested in the idea of taking this old music that's an interchange between black folks and white folks and presenting it in a new way. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 some years, right?
You,
So it's important.
there's a great question here that I think is a little too large for the scope of what we have left, but I want to say it because I think it's a great question and actually can be the topic, the ongoing topic of something we can all brainstorm and check back with each other, which is how can we help to make this a tipping point for change? Doable steps for presenters. And that's a great idea. I don't think that we're going to come up with that list right now, but I think that list is gettable. And I
Mhm.
think when I look at the beehive we have created in Folk Alliance, especially in my Folk Alliance Midwest, I think everyone in here is capable of contributing to that conversation in a way that we could come up with a doable list of things we could start doing right away as presenters and festivals to start building those bridges. And although we might not be able to give you that practical list right now, I think that's a real worthy goal
Right.
of our organization and as us as humans and artists.
You know, one of the stories that I love to tell, because I'm also a storyteller, but I'll make this really, really short. But one of the stories that I love to tell is I got a call to come down to Hamilton, Alabama, to a little college. And I get to and I got real opinions about Alabama. My folks came from Alabama. And I remember George Wallace and I remember Selma and all those images and stuff, right? But I get to go down to this college in Alabama, and this woman invites me down, and her name was um, blah, it'll come back to me. But she invites me down, and she says, I want you to come down and talk to my kids. They're upward bound kids, and they're really enthusiastic, and they need to see somebody like you. And I go, okay, cool. So I arranged to go down, and it's in February, so there's a major snowstorm that's coming up, and I end up having to call her to say, you know what, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it. My flight is canceled. Oh no! So she starts going to work to get me down to Alabama. And eventually I get down to Alabama. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm still prepared to go down and go to this college and play for these kids. And this particular town, or this particular county, during the Civil War, they had seceded from the South when the South seceded from the Union. And I just did a little research on it, but it's like, I'm not thinking about that. I go, the room is dark, boom. I do my performance. I hear this groundswell of like applause, and these kids are standing up and yelling and loving what I'm doing. The lights come up, and I realize that out of 300 kids, 275 of them are white. And I'm like, dude, upward bound does not mean black. Upward bound means kids who are struggling and trying to get over poverty and to achieve what they, and become who God would have them to be. And I realized that this woman said they need to see you not because of the color of your skin, but because of the message that you bring. And I got to take a picture with the diversity committee, and the diversity committee had no diversity. They were all white. So it's me and 7 white people, but that's the diversity committee. My point being that you don't have to be anyone other than who you are to start doing the work, right? To
That's a
decide that this
beautiful
is
point.
important and get it done.
That's a beautiful point because we can't be anybody other than who we are. I mean that sets it up for us. At this point, Annie, do you want to see if anybody has anything on their mind? I mean, Robert and I, as I mentioned earlier, could talk for 13 hours. We've done it before. We're certainly prepared to do it
Zoom won't
again.
let us.
I'm not
But
seeing, yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing any hands raised. I think people are just really enjoying this conversation and hearing from you. And there have been some, I think there's been a lot of chatter in the, in the chat room. And I think that it's a lot to get to. Diane Perry brought up the idea of bringing the jazz community under the folk umbrella, because that's one way to kind of integrate music. I'll say integrate musically, but oh, Jane has her hand raised. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to put you on top if you have your hand raised. I don't see your hand raised. Why don't I see your hand raised? Okay, Jane. I think Jane was one of the first ones to put something in there. Do you want me to unmute you, honey? Let's have you chat. Go.
Hi.
Hey,
I can't find you in the thing, though.
I see her.
There you are.
This is kind of a long question or a long explanation, but I just happened to have this conversation last night with my daughter, who is getting married supposedly in September, but probably not till next spring. But she had a conversation with her fiance, who had said that he wanted to include the song "Stand by Me," and I don't think he meant in the wedding ceremony, but at least add it to the playlist or whatever. So then they got in this debate about cultural appropriation, because Mary, I guess, had heard there was some controversy at Meghan and Harry's royal wedding, where the black gospel choir sang it, and because the song has its roots in, I think Ben King took it from a religious hymn back in the 1905.
Everything comes from those Tims.
Right.
So
And because of there was connection to the guy that wrote it, his father was a slave, and then it became the song that Ben King wrote,
right.
and then
Yeah.
the civil rights movement, and it was sort of anthemic. So she was just very concerned that it wasn't appropriate for these two white people to have this song at their wedding. And my take on it was that you're going to be hard pressed to find a song that doesn't have its roots in African American experience. So not to worry about it. But I thought I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in general.
I run into that question about appropriation all the time. Let me tell you what appropriation is. Appropriation is when the Rolling Stones take a song written by Reverend Robert Wilkins called Prodigal Son and copy it note for note and put Mick Jagger's name on it. That's appropriation. To me, if you hear a song and it moves you, acknowledge where you got it and keep it moving. It is privilege that says that a white man cannot sing a black man song because it's lowly oppressed and all of that kind of stuff and born in slavery. But on the other hand, a black man can sing a white man song. So who determines what is appropriation? If I sing a song that was written, as I often do, by, of all people, George Jones or Willie Nelson, because I like the song, I have never run across a song. Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, I have never run across a song and said, can't sing it, I'm not white.
on the other
But
hand, I would just add to that. That's one thing, of course, but sing it like you do. Sing it, make it your
right,
song. I'm not going to sing an Irish Revolution song and put on a terrible brogue. That might fall under appropriation as well.
absolutely.
Or every time I sing a blues song, do some ridiculous thing to make myself look like a blues singer. That to me but the song itself, those songs belong to everybody.
Say, my opinion is tell people why you're singing it and acknowledge why you love it and where you got it from and go, right? So, to sit here and take a whole body of art and give only certain people permission to interpret, view, or create that art is something called segregation.
Interesting.
The very thing that we're supposedly fighting against, right? It I don't I don't sit there and try to decipher the ethnicity of the person who's doing. And think about how many songs, someone like George and Ira Gershwin, who were obviously listening to African American music and street songs and hollers and gospel and spirituals when they composed the music for Porgy and Bess or Rhapsody in Blue and all of this other kind of stuff.
Or
And so
Dvorak's, New World Symphony, same
there
thing.
you go.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna be in this thing together, we need to be in this thing together.
Does that answer the quest? That was a very good question, Jane. I hope that
Yeah.
takes care of it a
I'm
little
sorry.
bit.
I muted you, Jane. So I'm just
Oh,
hopefully,
oh, she's
sorry.
a hard
I'm
woman.
on, I'm on that mute button. I've made that mistake before. It's usually myself that's
I
unmuted.
just finished writing this song called "What Will You Where Will You Be When the Smoke Clears?" And
Mm,
to me, that's the most important question right now. Is
Mm.
like, I've said this to a couple of my closer friends, but we experienced a few years back the probably the most atrocious thing you could possibly imagine: an armed man going into a elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut, and opening fire. And no matter how you feel about gun control, after that a thing that no one could endorse in any way unless you were a monster, and not a single law changed, and the smoke cleared, and nobody all of a sudden, we're not asking the question, or somebody are, but we're not pointing the cameras at the people who are so to me it's like it's what happens next that is most interesting to me. And I say that because I think it's what we do next as a community is really important. We're all feeling it right now. But to sustain these things, to keep these brainstorms going, to make those to-do lists, and to follow up on these conversations, and to continue to have the conversations, to me is the best thing we could be doing as a group right now. Especially, I mean, again, I'm humbled in this community. These are smart, active people with great intentions. We have a lot of power.
yeah, we do, and sometimes we don't realize how much power we have because we're not what organized. And one of the messages that I preached about last week was that the African American church was 50 years ago the most powerful organizing influence in the community and maybe in the country because not because of its affluence, but because it took people, simple everyday people, who wanted to bring about a change, and they said, if the buses are going to treat you badly, don't ride on them, and if this restaurant is not going to seat you equitably, don't attend it. And not only did black people follow suit, but white people of conscience followed suit. And black folks and white folks walk together to create substantive change. Now, I'm really excited that I see all of these folks marching in the streets and talking about George Floyd. My concern is that once the smoke clears, we're going to go back to shopping in the same places. We're going to go back to dealing with companies that have the same policies. We're not going to hold our politicians accountable. We're not going to change the laws. We're not, when you hire a police officer, somewhere in that profile should be, do they should tend, is this a person who tends to show cruelty? Is this a person who has a record? Because it takes a special kind of nut to choke some man to death, putting your knee on his neck for 8 minutes. That's not a normal kind of guy. So what you've got to understand is you're going to run across them, those strange people. They come in all shades, all races, all religions. You're going to run across them. The question is, what do you do to weed those people out, to create an atmosphere that says to condone it? If you're a police officer and you see that happening, do you step up and take that guy's knee off that other guy's neck? Do you create a situation in a police department that is responsible in getting an arrested person from the place that they're arrested to the jail in one piece? If you start to do that, because we have, in a sense, very much like Dr. King and Harry Belafonte and Peter, Paul, and Mary and all of those other, pinkos that they probably referred to them there, and Joan Baez, they used that music to effectively help to change people's hearts, and that brought about a change of mind. Since then, we have had this me cultural mindset and shift. This culture of privilege. The most important thing is to make money. The most important thing is my individual autonomy, not the help or not the sake of the community. That mind shift has happened over the last 70 years, and it will continue to happen unless people of conscience keep on bringing us back to the fact that we are and want to live in a beloved community. So we have to sing about and write about and paint about and speak about that beloved community in order for it to happen, in order for it to continue.
Those of you who know me know that as we wrap this thing up, that it absolutely tears my heart out that I can't end it by leading you in some song of some kind, especially this talented group of people. But let's hope we can all be together again, sit in that big circle. I love every one of you. And, it's so nice to be able to open this up and see where it goes next. If this is something you'd want to continue, please let Annie know. And, we can always set this up. I don't know about you guys, but I am now officially a stay-at-home musician. I got time on my hands. Every single gig I had's canceled between now and forever. So let's have this conversation. Let's
And
continue.
let me say this before I leave. Thank you, Annie, for making this forum possible and for bringing all of us together in this circle. I've been trying to use my time fruitfully. I've been working on like a music channel and teaching online guitar lessons and all that other good stuff. But since we got time on our hands, what a great opportunity for us to write those songs, or for us to see if we can start to build that community when we come out of our individual caves. And when we start to just see, since we got time on our hands anyway, if we can sort of build that community that we aspire to be a part of.
Thank
So
you,
again,
Robert.
thank you all.
Love you, man.
Love you
Thank
too,
you.
man.
Thank you both. I hate to do this because I
Mm,
love looking at Robert, but before you all go, let's cancel the spotlight on Robert and have y'all hit the gallery view and flash your hands to show appreciation for both Matt and Robert, how much we adore you both and all of you. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us this afternoon to talk about this really important conversation. I think we should have more of these. We're my committee. I see Brianna Lane in there. Brianna Lane is a big part of this Virtual Connections committee, and we've got a lot of really cool stuff happening for you. So, little plug: go to farmvirtualconnections.org, and you'll see everything that's coming up next week. And we want to hear from you about what more you would like to hear from us. So that's what Farm is doing for you right now. And in the meantime, I tried really hard to keep up with it. Most of you had some really great feedback. I'm going to go through the chat when we're done and share anything. We're also going to send out a survey that we hope you'll fill out and give us some good constructive feedback. But I can't imagine you would say anything but how beautiful and wonderful it was to hear from you,
Annie,
Robert, today.
since I was having trouble getting through those chat questions, it would be great if we do this again. Maybe we can lead with whatever questions we didn't get to. So if you
Yeah,
bring
no,
those
I
together,
think,
that'd be great.
yeah, for sure. I think we did pretty good. There were a couple of things that it feels like to me, I think the next level, which is opening up a can of worms, is the audiences. We've talked a lot about bringing performers in, but how do we integrate the audience, make them more
Right.
colorful as well? And there's a lot of talk about women and the LGBT community, and there's lots of ways we can talk about being more open in our communities. But we love you all. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Annie.
Please stay in touch with us. Robert, We'll see you again. Matt,
All right.
thank you so much for moderating beautifully. And this is going to seem very abrupt and horrible, but I'm going to click the big fat end button. So everybody quick wave. Bye. Have a great weekend.